All right, welcome, Mr. Cooper. Thanks for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Jeremiah Cooper. I have a small IT company in Yuba City, California, and we develop custom software as well as manage two products, and we do data processing for one of those products. So we have a team of about 10 people now, myself included, and yeah, that's me.
Why do you like working in the computer science field?
Because you don't have to deal with people. No, just kidding. Why do I like computer science? Computer science is something that I grew up with. So, it was something that I always enjoyed, and it was kind of early on in the personal computer days, and so, we were able to get video games. And playing video games was kind of the goal, but it wasn't like today where, you just pick up a smartphone. You really had to work to get your video games to actually play properly.
Yeah.
Especially on secondhand equipment, which is what we had. So, so that's kind of what led me into it. It was it was a skill that I knew, and it was a skill that was in demand.
Yeah.
And I love designing things. I like building things.
Right.
I love challenges. So I suppose those are all things that kind of
Stuff you get to do every day, challenges and puzzles. Huh?
right. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Why do you choose to be self-employed in a small business? And could you speak to the quality of life or having a boss maybe not directly over you or amount of time you spend on projects?
So I worked in the private sector for a number of years. In fact, I worked in the public sector, then worked in the private sector. I got to a point, and without getting into too much of my kind of personal history, I got to a point where I was really burnt out. I was working as a contractor, and I had a certain number of billable hours that I had to meet. And being divorced at the time, and with two kids I had custody with, I was really, in order to hit that target, right, I owed somebody 40 hours of my time every week. I had a set schedule, or a set number, like I said, number of hours, and then I was just exhausted because I had all the kind of personal things that I was going through, and then an opportunity came to go out on my own, and so I jumped at it, and I didn't even think that I would ever, have a business that employed other people. Even it was really just a contract gig that I could do and set my own hours. So, in terms of quality of life and whatnot, it would really depend on the sort of business, I suppose, that you are running. It was a lot easier when it was just me. As soon as I started hiring employees, the kind of the overhead and the difficulty and the stress level went up, tenfold. So, I don't know if that answered the question well enough.
I appreciate that. Would you recommend to my students that they run a small business themselves right after they graduate, or should they work for someone else for a while?
I would say unless they have, there's kind of two different people types. There are those people that just want to know everything about everything, and they'll spend time and energy. These are workaholic type people, right? And so they've already come up with 12 good ideas by the time they're out of college.
Right.
So for those sorts of people, yeah, why not? You probably either you're going to live at home with your parents, or you're probably not married yet, probably don't have kids, and so it would be a great time to fail, because you don't have all those things, right? So you have the ability to take a risk like that.
Right.
But I think for the vast majority of people, you come out of school, and this was the case for me, you don't know anything.
Right.
You don't know how business works. You don't know how the world works.
Right.
Sometimes you don't even know how you yourself work.
Right.
So you kind of have, there's that, I know that if I had tried to immediately leave school and start a business, it would have been a gigantic, epic failure. So I think for the vast majority of people, I would say go find somebody that can really show you the ropes. Smaller companies, if you can find them, because A, they're looking for people on the cheap,
Right.
And B, you have way more opportunity. You're not a cog that's fitting into this giant system.
Right.
You have way more opportunity for growth and for learning in those environments. So that would be, if someone were asking me, that's what I'd tell them.
Absolutely. What are some secrets of running a small business that are successful for you?
Persistence, honestly.
Yeah.
So I as I mentioned, I worked for just as a contractor myself.
Yeah.
That was pretty easy
Mm-hmm.
because all I needed to do was bill a certain number of hours, and then everything else was mine, right?
Right.
I could work or not work. If I didn't work, I didn't eat, but that was fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of knew where I was at.
Yeah.
When you start a business, you are you're really stepping into something that is completely different than what you've ever done before, right? And you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
And I'm just going to say that as a general rule, you don't know what you're doing, and if you've especially when you start hiring employees, you really don't know what you're doing.
Right.
So I worked in the IT business for maybe, I started working for myself in 2012. So I had been in it for a good dozen years already.
Sure.
And I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
You know, there's so many facets to a business.
Mm-hmm.
You have to figure out everything. Literally everything is on your shoulders.
That's right.
From HR to taxation to
That's right.
legal stuff. If you can incorporate liability. Literally everything is on your shoulders.
Right.
And so when I started taking on employees, my wife and I got remarried, and so it was a huge risk. And thank God that she was willing to kind of white knuckle it out with me, because there were times where God was very faithful. I was able to pay everybody else, but we didn't get paid.
Right.
And so there are going to be those times where cash flow. You have to pay everybody else. There's no requirement to pay yourself, but there's a legal requirement to pay your people.
That's right.
And so it's just you really have to believe what you're doing. You won't make it if you don't.
Right.
And so it's just being willing to be persistent and white knuckle it out until 3-4 years later you're finally on your upswing. So that's just gird yourself up.
Amazing.
That's my
Exactly.
advice.
Yep. What other things did you learn from the experience of working for someone else?
Of someone else? Well, I suppose a lot of things. What to do. Like, it's kind of like, I think, when you're growing up in your home and you watch your parents, right? You see all the good things that they did and things that you value. And you see the things that, I'm not going to do that, right? So there were a lot of things I had an opportunity to work for just an amazing company called Nutro. And they were very hardworking, very diligent. They were #1 in the pet industry at the time, pet specialty. And just, they had a work ethic and a culture that even in my company I'm trying to emulate some of the positive aspects that I saw there. They were purchased about 6 years into my tenure there. They were purchased by Mars, Mars, the candy bar people. And so I got to see a much larger company. Nutro had maybe 400 or 500 people at the time. Mars had 40,000 people at the time. And so they purchased Nutro. And so I got to see that whole transition and that culture. So I learned a lot of what not to do from kind of watching how the Mars culture and the Nutro culture meshed, or I guess really didn't mesh. And so that was I think people was probably the #1 thing that I learned when I was working for Nutro. People do business with people that they know, like, and trust. Right. So Mars had a low value on the individual. They were very much a cog, in a machine sort of approach. Nutro managed personalities. And they managed so much better than Mars did. And so probably my #1 takeaway was understanding people, the nature of people, how they work, what motivates people, right? What is it that instills that desire to do well? And so those, I think I learned a tremendous amount. I worked for a man named James Keltman. He was very foundational. He was one of the most diligent, hardworking people that I'd ever met. He'd wake up at 4, ride his bike in to work, and he would work until 5 or 6, ride his bike home. He was just, he would tell you this himself. He's, not the brightest guy, but he was probably that's where I think a lot of my persistence and just kind of my work ethic came from
Yeah.
was working under him and understanding that, you know, he would give a lot of grace for things that wouldn't work right. He would give zero grace for, you know, some kind of unethical, you know, me being lazy or me not thinking things, you know,
That's right.
just not taking
Yeah.
a good approach to things. And
Right.
so,
Right.
yeah, I think that's probably
That's awesome.
probably a long answer, but hopefully
That's great.
met the question.
Anything else you want to impart to the next generation?
A ton. Yeah, so if you're coming out of the computer science field, I'll give you kind of an anecdote that'll illustrate my point. I hired a guy, his name was Matt Hallmark, and he was a AC, heating and air, HVAC guy, and he had always wanted to be in the computer science field. And so he'd taken some online classes, nothing major, had no experience.
Right.
He got laid off from his work. I kind of knew him through
Right.
his family, and so he came to work. And he came to my office. We'd done a Java class there, and he loved it. That was over. He
Yeah.
came. He got laid off and said, "Hey, I got laid off.
Yeah.
Can I just show up?
Right.
And I'll learn everything I can.
Right.
And if you find a place for me, great. If not, no worries. You don't have
Yeah.
to pay me or anything."
Right.
That guy worked in 2 weeks. He was billable.
Wow.
Because every night he went home, I gave him a little bit, and he would run with it. He was
Right.
so diligent,
Yeah.
and he was hungry, right?
Yeah.
He was hungry. He knew
Yeah.
he needed to feed his family. He
Right.
knew he had all these things that he needed to take care of,
Right.
and so I'm sure that was part of it.
Yeah.
But he wanted to know everything he could.
That's right.
He succeeded. He became my lead developer
Wow.
because, and like I said, in 2 weeks he was billable because he had this. I'm sure intelligence factors into it, but if you're going to go to work for somebody,
Yeah.
work like you're working for yourself,
That's right.
right? I mean, the Bible says work unto the Lord, but work like you would want someone to work for you. Make them succeed, because if you're making them succeed, if you are the hardest working person there, if you show up early, you go home late, and you
Right.
stick in your hours, especially if it's a smaller company,
Yeah.
those are the people that get promoted.
That's right.
Because you have coming out of a program, you really know nothing, and so ask questions, right? Do your homework after work. Learn as much as you can, because that is what will advance you in your career.
Right. Right. Very good. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Okay.